to follow an act like Representative Bacon's, but we have a very worthy group of people to be able to do that. We've covered, in the morning, we've covered land forces and we've covered naval forces. We have equally powerful panel group covering air capabilities and air defense capabilities. And as you've heard from the morning discussions, these air defense capabilities are ultra important given the larger issue of the infrastructure. So the big question that I need to know is whether General Breedlove is with us.
He is.
He is. Okay, so with that.
Sorry. Your line,
Gransky, are you working for the guys next door for the Russians? The sound system, this AV stuff you're doing is just, anyway. Well, long story short, Ambassador Bill Courtney is, and I'm going to introduce him and then let him introduce everyone else. I just simply wanted to say there are a series of these senior American diplomats. They are part of what some people might call the deep state, or unkindly, ambassadors and generals that make America what it is. And that is some of the most sophisticated diplomats and generals the modern world has seen. So, Bill, with that, I really mean this. You've been with us from the very beginning, literally from 2000. You've been with us with 25 years, and I want to honor you with that. You, Taylor, Herbst, that is just, I mean, they can't substitute for folks like you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So we have a terrific panel. We're going to talk about the air war and just a couple of big comments.
Yeah. Is it green?
Let
me switch this.
Thank you. One of the biggest surprises at the opening of the war was that Russia, despite having a superior air force, was not able to gain air superiority over the Ukrainian-controlled territory, much less air dominance, which one would normally want for a campaign, an offensive campaign. So it was a tremendous success for Ukraine to be able to prevent Russia from doing that. And now when we take a look at what's happening in the air war, there are a lot of interesting issues. One, air defense. Often in defense discussions, offensive issues, offensive systems tend to get more publicity and more attention than defensive systems. One of the lessons of the Ukraine war is that air defense is more important than a lot of people thought before, and it's been critical for Ukraine. So Ukraine employs a multi-layered air defense system, combining advanced Western systems such as Patriots, NASAMS, and NASAM is a ground-launched version of our AMRAAM missile, and RST with Soviet-era platforms, so advanced Western systems and Soviet platforms. The Patriot is the top layer for ballistic and high-speed missiles. The Europeans don't have a system like Patriot, so Patriot is uniquely capable. Medium and short-range systems defend lower altitude and high-volume threats. Ukraine is now using fast, inexpensive quadcopters to intercept Russian drones, accounting for nearly 30% of the downed aerial threats. Ukraine is producing nearly 1,000 interceptor drones per day to combat the high volume of Russian Shahed-style long-range drone attacks. The Ukrainian Air Force intercepted over 140,000 aerial targets since 2022. Now, one aspect of this that's important is the cost per kill. So Ukraine went into this war with some Western assistance, such as Sidewinder missiles, for example, and others, which are expensive systems. But against drones, the cost of the air defense systems was so high. So what was urgent was for Ukraine to develop very low-cost interceptor drones. And that's not easy because interceptor drones generally have to be smarter and more maneuverable than the offensive systems. but Ukraine has had some remarkable success in that area. One issue I hope our panel will discuss is the issue of tomahawks. There've been calls from Ukrainians and others that we should provide tomahawks. The U.S. has very few Typhon ground launchers for tomahawks. Tomahawks typically are launched from ships or the Alcom sense from airplanes, but we don't have very many of these Typhon launches for ground launch. So this is one issue if we do go for tomahawks. So I'd like for our panel to talk about the tomahawk issue. And then there is a new system which the Defense Department has developed in a remarkably short time called the Extended Range Aerial Munition, ERAM, which is kind of a cheaper version of JASSM. We have a lot of JASSMs, which we could provide Ukraine. The ERAM is a cheaper, new version. We don't have a lot yet, but they're producing a lot. So I'd like for our panel to talk a little bit about those systems. So let me just quickly introduce our panel. Phil Breedlove is a highly decorated general of the United States Air Force. He reached the pinnacle of the military as one of 6 geographic combatant commanders and Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. As SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Breedlove led the most comprehensive strategic, structural, and policy security changes in NATO's history. Second, Kateryna, sorry, I got the wrong. Kateryna Stepanenko is a Russian research fellow at the Institute for the Study of War. And I think you all know, Institute for the Study of War has been the main mechanism by which most of us understand what's going on in the war. She serves as a senior member of the team that has managed and produced the daily Russian offensive campaign assessments since February 2022, and those are must readings. Whatever you read them, that is the most important one to read. And she previously covered Russia's preparations for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And our third panelist is Anna Harvey. Anna joined the American Foreign Policy Council as a research fellow and program officer in October 2025. She specializes in Ukrainian and Russian history and politics, with a particular interest in defense planning and military innovation. Anna is currently working on a long-term research project analyzing Ukraine's wartime defense industry and lessons learned for the U.S. So let's start with General Breedlove. General, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I apologize. I'm at Georgia Tech, the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, and I'm teaching this week. So I am dressed for college, not dressed for fancy Washington meetings. A few things I'll touch on that you have brought up. You addressed a big problem, which is being on the wrong side of the cost curve when it comes to defending inside of Ukraine. May I just add that this is not specific to Ukraine. As I have traveled and I've just returned from a trip recently, I'm talking to lots of nations in Europe and frankly in the Middle East about how do we get on the right side of the cost curve when it comes to defending against these new capabilities. And it's not going to be an easy problem. There are some very neat, if I could use that word, approaches that are being tested now that will drastically lower the cost of intercept by air-to-air missile using such things as new warheads for 2.755 FFARs, which we have tens of thousands of in our inventory. And so there's things happening out there. But I want to bring something else up in just a minute, which I think is also important to understand. The second one is that you brought up Tomahawk. Tomahawk, we should have already given Ukraine the Tomahawk. This is not a problem of what, where, and when. It's a problem of policy. We've dangled it. We've sort of tried to prod Russia with it, but we have not delivered on our promises about Tomahawk. And the fact of the matter is, the main problem with Tomahawk and getting to use Tomahawk once we get it forward is policy. It's none of the other things that people all talk about. One of the big problems is we have often the Russians actually believe that the vertical launchers in our two missile, or not missile, but radar sites in Romania and Poland, that those vertical launchers are for Tomahawk. They are not, but they could be. And we need to understand why Russia is worried about that. So bringing ground launched Tomahawk into theater is going to be an issue as we deal with Russia about what we're doing in Europe. The ERAM is long overdue. I don't think that it has quite the capabilities that you mentioned, sir. I don't mean to nit. It's a great weapon, but it's far from a JASM. And the JASM is an important weapon that I think we should be considering for these guys. I would like to step back, though, and seize on something you mentioned in your introductions, and that is that the Russian Air Force has failed in many aspects to do some of the most basic air capabilities, or provide those for its ground force. The Russian ground force has never enjoyed air superiority over its head in the combat zone, and neither has the Ukrainian army, for that matter. We wouldn't expect Ukraine's Air Force to have been able to do this because we neutered it as a part of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. I'm sorry. And so the Ukraine Air Force is what I really want to talk about. But the point being, Russia still today, 12 years into this war. Everybody talks about this war being 4 years long. It's 12 years long. The full-scale invasion, I like to think of as phase 3 of this 12-year-long war. We're 12 years long into a war, and the Russian Air Force, which we all thought at one time was maybe the third or fourth best in the world, is unable to extend battlefield air superiority over its own troops. That's not an equipment problem. That's a training and capability problem. The West, specifically the United States, trains and has specific wings and pilots who are trained for the suppression of enemy air defenses and destruction of enemy air defenses missions. It is a horribly hard mission to do. I was qualified in it, and you must stay proficient. And what we have seen is the Russian Air Force is incapable of it, and that's why they don't own the airspace over Ukraine. We should learn the lesson that we can never step back from the cost and the effort to train pilots who are able to do what we did in Baghdad when everybody said we wouldn't break the MES, the super MES, and what we have done in every war since that time to eliminate the enemy's air-to-air capability. And that's what I'd like to close out with. I know your panel is going to do a magnificent job of talking about the subjects you brought up on drones and other new forms or new parts of air war. I would like to remind and focus this group on the fact that we are now very consumed with the immediate in Ukraine. We have lots of work to do to get the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people the defensive capabilities that they need. I support that 100%. But if we only focus on the immediate, when the immediate is over, we will not be prepared for tomorrow. We have to begin to prepare today for tomorrow. And a big part of that, which has fallen off of the table of late, is the discussion of fourth plus generation or fifth generation air and the training of pilots to be able to employ 4+ or 5th generation air. That does not happen overnight. And so if we are not also now focusing on that long-term capability, Ukraine will not be able to handle the next if we only focus on the now. And that's the last word I would like to leave you with. Thanks for letting me make my remarks.
Well, thank you for that. Just one quick clarification. When you say 4th and 5th generation air, could you give some examples of which aircraft fall into that category?
Well, so for me, 4th generation air is the F-16, F-15 class aircraft that we have a lot of those in our inventory. The 4+ generation are aircraft of that same ilk, but have increased capability in their links, increased capability. We don't even call them radars anymore. We call them apertures because they are both offensive, defensive, and radar basic capabilities. But many manufacturers, especially in the West now, are entering into a phase where the 4th generation aircraft have really stepped up in the capabilities of their apertures and their links and their weapons, and that makes them a 4th+ kind of generation aircraft. To become, in my mind, a 5th generation aircraft, we now have to get to stealth, true stealth. A lot of the 4th generation airplanes have reduced their radar cross sections, and they are more capable as far as having a reduced radar cross section. But there's a difference between reduced radar cross section and true stealth. So 5th generation, to me, the audience can define it how they want to in their head. But for me, true 5th generation is a stealth platform. And then I guess the last thing I would close out with, I'm sorry I didn't make the point, is we have seen what happens in Ukraine when two air forces fail to establish air superiority over the battlefield. Now, if we just look back a couple of months now, and we look at Operation Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer in Iran, we see what happens when air forces go in and establish air dominance over a battlefield. The Israelis and the US forces went in, established air superiority and air dominance over a battlefield. And then in the western 60% of Iran, they started to systematically disassemble the military capabilities of Iran. And so, again, as I mentioned before, we need to think about tomorrow in Ukraine, not just defending today. We need Ukraine to be able to establish and maintain air superiority over their troops so that they can then take the fight to Russia on their side of the border. Over.
Thank you, sir. General Breedlove needs to leave early. So let's take 2 questions for General Breedlove, and then we'll go to our speakers. Any questions for General Breedlove?
I think the mic's over there.
No.
Oh.
Yeah, we were.
Hi there, Yuri Makar, advocate from South Dakota. Question is this, there's always in this current administration and the previous administration, whenever there's a talk about new weapons or equipment that's being given, it always when they're not ready to talk about it or to provide it, they say, oh, well, Tomahawks, Ukrainians don't have the training for it, and then the conversation just stops. And so what are ways to keep the conversation going to where, okay, if the problem is that the Ukrainians do not have the training, let's move forward on what we can do to provide this training. Otherwise, when 6 months later, the administration or whatever the administration is ready to provide this equipment, then that conversation of training restarts again I'm like,
Okay,
oh, we have
okay,
to wait, keep
We've
going.
got it, got the
Sorry.
question. Okay, second question? Yes.
Thank you, General, for supporting Ukraine from the beginning of this conflict, 12 years and even more. How about taking your message? How effective is this message that I've seen you deliver this message many times. How effective are you taking it to the current administration and the powers that be? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. General, Ken, the
Okay.
comments you have on those two questions?
Thanks for these two questions. I'll answer the second one first. The effectiveness is a little bit limited. We are having great effect with people like Don Bacon, who used to work for me, by the way. He was a magnificent wing commander at Ramstein when I was his 3rd Air Force commander. We have a lot of support in the middle of our Congress. And that is on both sides of the aisle, may I add. We have a lot of support. On the fringes, on one fringes, we have the isolationists who are like, this is not our fight, get away from it. And on the other fringe, I'm just not going to describe those people, but the bottom line is there are fringes who are completely uninterested in what's going on in Ukraine. We're making no headway with either of those fringes. But I would tell you that as we take the message to what I think is well over half of the Congress, which is sitting in the middle, on the left and on the right, our messages on Ukraine are well understood and supported. You've seen some of the writings that are out there. That we're not having any trouble with those folks. Our real issues at this point are dealing with our senior most leadership and trying to understand where they're headed when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. Right now, I don't grade their paper. Everybody in the world knows I'm a conservative, but I don't do politics. But right now we have a businessman and a real estate person doing our work when it comes to Russia. And I think we're looking at a lot of options for business opportunities. And I think we should be really focused on some first person principles in this war. One of them is Russia started this war. It was for them. It benefits them. They told us what they want to do in the 2 documents they gave us at the first part of this 3rd phase of the war. We should not be confused about what Russia intends to do. They told us. And their leader, who is leading them through this immoral, illegal, inhumane war, is a war criminal. And if we remember all of that, it will make a lot of the other negotiations we need to do much more simple. So I think we just need to get back focused on first principle issues when it comes to Russia and settle down to what are the concessions that Russia will give. We seem to be only focused on the asks for concessions with the aggrieved party, not the offensive party. And so we need to get refocused on that, I think. So I am as frustrated as the gentleman was with this training is the problem business. Listen, I can tell you the facts of when I was the SACEUR. We wanted to give Ukraine some counter battery, counter mortar radars. And the same thing popped up. They'll never be able to figure it out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we finally figured that out and gave them the counter battery, counter fire radars. And they were using them rapidly in the field. In fact, now they inform our use of our own radars. They're teaching us new tactics, techniques, and procedures that they developed. And if you remember, when we gave them this radar, they were digitally limited. The policy from our senior most leaders at the time limited so they could not see into Russia. Okay. Well, the Ukrainians figured out how to string them and do some certain things with them so they could see a lot more than we wanted them to see. The Ukrainians are way absolutely incredible at figuring out our kit, and this whole line of talk about training and stuff is really a policy tool to slow things down when we don't want to move quickly. The Ukrainians are proving to be very adept at picking up ours. I expect after this war is over, we're going to learn a lot about drones from Ukraine, and we're going to learn a lot about how to use our own F-16s, not ours. America hasn't given them any F-16s, our allies have. But we will learn how the Ukrainians will teach us to use the F-16 to shoot down drones. It's the wrong side of the power curve, but they are doing things we never would have expected from them. So to the young man that asked this question, it's a great question. The real problem is not the ability of the Ukrainians to absorb and use our kit. The real problem is it's a policy issue, and this is used as a roadblock to quickly implementing weapons and policy for Ukraine. Over.
Thank you very much. Those are encouraging and eloquent remarks. Kateryna.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. We've talked a lot about defense, which is extremely important in this war, but we actually also need to talk about enabling Ukrainians to do limited counterattacks, counteroffensives. And in order to do that, you actually do need air power. It is part of the combined arms warfare. And frankly, I'm just going to be straight with you. Ukraine will need to operate in air domain a lot more than it does right now to actually make gains on the battlefield. The reason why we don't think about the offensive in the air is because, frankly, it's not possible the way that the general described it. Air defense systems make it really hard for both Russian and Ukrainian forces to operate planes, especially in the rear of the enemy and farther in the intermediate rear. So what we saw was a kind of a solution to this, right? Both sides resorted to drones, the low altitude competition for essentially low altitude superiority. But drones have a problem. They don't have the payload. They don't have the necessary payload to blow up an assembly area 50 kilometers from the front line that actually matters, because that's where Russian forces concentrate before they go into the offensive. And so what we're seeing now is quite an interesting competition, because both Russian and Ukrainian forces are trying to achieve what we call the effects of battlefield air interdiction. They do this primarily with drones, but the Russians are trying to figure out ways to do it with also air power. It doesn't actually mean flying planes over Ukraine, but figuring out other ways to do bombardment, target Ukrainian logistics, things that actually matter for Ukrainians' frontline defenses. So what does Ukraine actually need to do some of these offensive operations? Ukraine absolutely needs to destroy hardened assembly areas and fortified positions in the intermediate operational rear. So that's 50 to 120 kilometers from the front line. Right now, they're trying to do this with their mid-range strike campaign. They use their heavy bomber drones, some glide bombs, but very limited. But we need to empower this. And in fact, Ukrainians were able to do some of these battlefield air interdiction campaigns in 2022 when they had HIMARS. HIMARS had the payload actually necessary to impose significant damages on Russian logistics, forcing Russian forces to leave the right bank Kherson Oblast. So the destruction of assembly areas is absolutely key to impede Russian ability to concentrate forces and equipment ahead of their offensives. It can also force Russians to move their key staging areas away from the front lines in an effort to protect their personnel and equipment, therefore requiring Russian forces to stretch their logistics and possibly weaken their frontline defenses. This is what Russians are trying to actively accomplish on the battlefield right now. So what does Ukraine need? It needs a combination of artillery, drones, missiles, rocket artillery, glide bombs with extended ranges. It's not that you can just have a drone that will solve all of your problems. It's not that you're just going to have one Tomahawk to solve all of your problems. It's actually a very layered air campaign that Ukraine must be empowered to achieve in order to weaken some of the lines that Russia has established. Glide bombs are in particularly interesting, and I don't think that we talk a lot about them, is because they actually can be effective. They have a very big payload, and they can destroy heavily fortified positions, especially as Russian forces are increasingly digging underground to hide from Ukrainian drones. So Ukrainians do have a problem with glide bombs. Right now, they can fire them, but only maybe 10 kilometers into the Russian operational depth. The reason for that is because in order for Ukrainian pilots to launch these strikes, they have to fly at a high altitude, which limits the range. Otherwise, these pilots can be a threat of Russian air defense systems. Now, so that imposes another dilemma, right? So we have Ukrainian forces needing to take the Russian air defense systems offline. And this is why I argue that we need a combined strike approach, because there are drone systems that can make it possible. We've seen Ukrainians do this, especially in occupied Crimea and occupied Zaryckyj. They use AI drones that fly on various different altitudes, avoid various Russian air defense systems. We've also seen Ukrainians do this with other more conventional systems, like HIMARS. By imposing consistent HIMARS strikes, Ukrainians were able to force Russians to move some of their systems further down away from the line. Russia fundamentally also has a very limited fleet of air defense systems. It's a key vulnerability that we need to empower Ukrainians to exploit. So in order to do that, you empower Ukrainians to do more strikes into Russia. You also empower Ukrainians to do strikes across the entire Ukrainian theater, so that Russia actually needs to prioritize which areas of the front line they have to deploy these systems to. So where the Russians are currently, they do have a limited advantage, which is where the air defense systems, not just in terms of protecting the rear, but also the immediate rear, really come into play. Right now, Russians have been able to consistently launch glide bombs at the distance of 60 kilometers from the front line since at least 2023, weakening Ukrainian fortified positions. A really good example of that is Avdiivka. A lot of damage was done because of the coordinated strike campaigns with glide bombs and essentially allowing Russian forces to advance. It is also because Russia is able to have these advantages because they have the operational depth. They can fly over occupied Ukraine, and also because they have large Soviet stockpiles that they're refurbishing and reintegrating into their fleet. Russia, with support of PRC, is working tirelessly to extend the ranges on glide bombs. And we actually saw this December Russians being able to accomplish a range of 200 kilometers on the glide bomb. And what that resulted was they targeted Ukrainian bridges in Odessa Oblast, and that was pretty devastating to see. So Ukraine does not just need to match some of these air capabilities that Russia is already innovating, but it also really needs more air defense systems, air defenders, and technological adaptations to protect against not just drones, not just missiles, but also glide bombs, and deny Russia that capability. So I know this was a little long, but I also have a couple of observations on air defenses. I'm really glad that we talked about the need for to urgently invest into cheap, attritable drone interceptors to counter emerging Russian Shahed threat. That's absolutely key. Look, the Russians are scaling their production. They're doing this with Chinese components. They have a lot of foreign labor that they're importing. They figured that out since 2023, so we're a little bit late on that. Russians are aiming to produce 1,000 Shahed type drones per month, or sorry, per day. Right now, they do this at 400. We don't have enough Patriot systems to shoot them all down. It's the sad truth. And in fact, the Russians are also simultaneously scaling their missile production. The recent reports indicate that Russians can produce around 60 Iskander ballistic missiles per month. So that's a growing threat that we have to address on its own. Shaheds are not just weapons that you use against, energy infrastructure. We see the Russians integrating first-person view capabilities into Shaheds, which makes it possible for Russians to target rail infrastructure, small subsections of Ukrainian energy and infrastructure, mine railroads, and key logistical nodes. This is a significant problem that you cannot just defend with one system in a city. So, what are some things that are working? Obviously, we've talked a lot about Ukrainian quadricopter production, but Ukrainians also recently started using the VEROPS platforms. Eric Schmidt is providing them. They're very, very helpful. They're very cheap at 15,000, and they've already intercepted over 1,000 Shaheds. We just need more of them, so that's a really great innovation. They're very smart. They have AI capabilities, and another thing on air defense, and that's, I think, where Tomahawks really come into play is, look, the main reason why Russia was able to fly so many Shaheds this winter is because in fall of 2025, we made a decision not to send the rumored 50 Tomahawks to Ukraine that absolutely could have blown the Republic of Tatarstan's plant, the drone production plant that is within range. And you do not need more than 50 to blow it up, unfortunately. But that was a strategic miscalculation that we made. And so when we talk about Tomahawks, we really do need to say that Ukrainians do have specific targets that they need to hit. The plant in Tatarstan that produces Shaheds every single day is exactly the type of a target that we need Tomahawks for. I'm happy to talk about any other tech innovations that we're seeing on the battlefield, but I hope this gives you a little bit of context of what we need to empower Ukraine on the battlefield. Thank you.
Kateryna, thank you.
Okay, I think that'll be a nice transition talking about why Russia was able to fly so many Shaheds today. So yes, before I get started, I want to thank everybody who's helping to host the event, Andre and Mick and Walter and Annie and all of our interns, the AFBC interns who are helping to keep this running. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you. And also thanks to Katya. She is part of the reason why I'm up here today. I worked at ISW under her for a while, and yeah, that's kind of where I cut my teeth on all of this. So very excited to be up here today. So I'm going to take a bit more of a humanitarian angle on this today, and I'm going to start with a bit of a personal story. So I decided to pivot away from Russia studies and toward Ukraine studies while I was living in Moldova from 2022 to 2023. I was there when Moldova was losing power due to Russian strikes in Ukraine. I would often have nights where I couldn't cook anything because my electric stove wouldn't turn on. It was very, very expensive to heat my apartment, so I didn't, and it was a very cold winter. And that is, clearly not even half as bad as what Ukrainians themselves are going through and were going through then. So from there, I decided that this was going to be the field that I would work in. And now we can see that Russia has not abated. They have not let up at all. They are recreating and worsening this 2022 crisis as we speak. If you just open the news, you can see how often they're striking Ukraine and what humanitarian impact that's having. So pardon me if I'm reading, I have a lot of numbers for you guys. Russia's current mass targeting of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure is meant to exploit gaps that Ukraine currently has in its air defenses, as Ukrainian air defense units are running low on ammunition. In August to September of 2025, we saw that Ukraine was able to intercept roughly 93% of Russian cruise missiles, and the current number is about 33 to 35%. This is according to Ukrainian Air Force data. Despite the huge amount of work that Ukraine has put into bolstering its defense industrial base, accelerating production and research and development timelines, and finding alternatives to Western military systems, Russia is sending an overwhelming amount of drones and missiles at Ukraine, which causes mass civilian casualties. Just to touch on a few of the high casualty incidences of this war so far, in April 2022, Russian ballistic missile strikes against the Kramatorsk train station killed at least 58 civilians and injured a further 100. A Russian cruise missile strike against a high-rise residential building in Dnipro in January 2023 killed 40 and injured a further 75. In November 2024, Russia launched multiple missiles at Sumy City and killed 11, including 2 children, and injuring at least 89 others. In April 2025, Russia struck the center of Sumy City again with ballistic missiles, killing at least 35, including 2 children. According to a Kyiv Post analysis of Ukrainian Air Force data, in January of this year, Russia fired a total of 116 missiles and 3,847 Shahed kamikaze drones against Ukraine. As I said before, in August 21 and September, between August 21st and September 20th of 2025, Ukraine was able to down over 90% of missiles, and this was the highest month-long strike package of the war so far. Russia launched 244 missiles of all types against Ukraine, which is more than twice what we're seeing now. The highest single night strike package of the war so far was 823 drones and 13 missiles on September 7th. And just to note, that did happen right before a phone call between Trump and Putin to talk about ending the war. While launching mass missile and drone strikes, Russia is also investing in research and developing new deadly systems, including ever faster long-range drones. For example, the Garan 5, which is the latest adaptation of the Garan drone, was described as a budget cruise missile by the Ukrainian specialist Zaryckyj. This drone is capable of traveling at 310 to 375 miles per hour and flying over 930 miles, which puts virtually all of Ukraine within range. The Ukrainian main directorate of intelligence has also reported that Russian Garans are capable of carrying air-to-air missiles, which limits the ability to intercept these Garan drones with counter-UAS technologies like interceptor drones. All in all, Ukraine's national air defense network is capable of downing 1 in 3 incoming Russian missiles and a high percentage of kamikaze drones, in part due to the large amount of work that Ukraine is putting into bolstering its own defense industry. We began to see Ukrainian interceptor drones taking down Shahed, Garan, and Gerbera drones in the summer of 2025, and in early January, the Ukrainian Minister of Energy announced that the Ukrainian defense industry is able to produce over 1,500 anti-Shahed drones per day. In late January, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense announced that Ukraine deployed roughly 40,000 interceptor drones in January of this year. So this means that the Ukrainian military is now consistently using indigenous interceptor drones, including, for example, the Sting and Shrike interceptor drones, to down Russian drones in its airspace, which allows the Ukrainian military to save on these limited systems like Patriot air defense missiles. So Ukrainian interceptor drones are currently a significantly cheaper option for air defense than these traditional, more expensive Western air defense systems. These drones can cost between $300 and $1,200, and they can also be rapidly deployed from anywhere and are very adaptable. Interceptor drones, however, are best equipped to handle medium-range targets and are limited by their strike capacity and the distance that they can fly. The Ukrainian military uses other systems as well beyond Western systems, including radio frequency jammers that disrupt radio communications, GPS spoofers that send false signals to drones, high-power microwave weapon systems that damage Russian drones' internal electronics, directed energy lasers that melt propellers and electronics, kinetic equipment like rifles and nets, and cyber interception that hack drone software to intercept control. Traditional air defense systems remain critical, however, and are capable of intercepting larger and faster drones like Garan, as well as aircraft and helicopters, and most importantly, missiles. They have a longer range of up to several hundred kilometers and are well equipped to cover military and critical infrastructure. But Ukraine has limited access to these air defense systems, including Patriots, due to funding constraints, but also US hesitancy to transfer these systems and missiles to them, and Western stockpile and production shortages. Despite Ukraine's varied approach to air defense, the overwhelming amount and constant pace of Russian drones and the high rate of missile use against Ukraine make it nearly impossible for Ukraine to fully secure its airspace unless the West steps up to provide greater support. In early February, NATO Secretary Mark Rutte reiterated that Western supplied air defense systems remain critical to Ukraine's fight against Russia, but we're still not giving enough. Zelensky said in January that Ukraine is experiencing gaps in the provision of PAC-3 missiles from the West, which have left certain Ukrainian Patriot air defense systems without missiles, and therefore the skies and Ukrainian cities without protection. The majority of Ukraine's advanced air defense systems still come from the US, including the Patriots. And this system, the Patriot, is the only air defense system made by the US that's capable of downing missiles. The US, we've seen in the past, has been reticent to provide the necessary amount. They waffled on deploying Patriots to Ukraine in 2022, and then froze military aid, including PAC-3 missiles in 2025, around this time last year. Ukraine is also experiencing shortages of other missiles, including AIM-9 and AMRAAMs for US-made F-16s. Ukraine needs these missiles to down incoming cruise missiles. We have taken a step in the right direction with the Prioritize Ukraine requirements list, which allows European allies to purchase US weapons and transfer them to Ukraine. So Europe is now able to purchase US-produced air defense systems on Ukraine's behalf and then deliver them to Ukraine. Just 2 weeks ago, Ukraine's European allies committed to sending a further 35 missiles to Ukraine for use in its Patriots. But this is just not enough for what Ukraine needs. The US does face a production issue, which limits the amount of missiles that are available. Systems like the Patriots are US capabilities that need to be rationed among various hotspots and are produced in relatively small quantities. I'm going to zero in on the year 2024, so all this data comes from that year. Raytheon produced in 2024 only 12 Patriot battery systems. That's the whole system that holds all the different missiles simultaneously and shoots them. Lockheed Martin in that same year exceeded 500 PAC-3 builds for the very first time. Raytheon produced approximately 1,600 AIM-9s and 1,200 AMRAAMs. This is, of course, these are not the only systems that the US is producing, but these are critical systems that Ukraine would benefit from. Russia in 2024 launched over 250 missiles just at Kyiv and over 2,000 at Ukraine as a whole. So doing the math, looking at those 3 missiles that I mentioned, the US is producing a little over 3,000 of these missiles in total, while Ukraine needs over 2,000 a year. These needs are massive, and the US export capacity is limited by our production capacity and our commitments to other allies and partners. Air defense systems and emerging technologies, including mobile air defense groups, interceptor drones, these high energy weapons, these are all central to Ukraine's ability to protect itself against Russia's constant onslaught. But without sustained international support, including increased US production and export of critical weapon systems, especially through Pearl, the people of Ukraine will continue to suffer. In the absence of sufficient air defenses, the human cost of this war is measured not only in the loss of critical and military infrastructure, but in cold apartments, dark hospitals, traumatized children, unnecessary lives lost. Air defense is not some abstract military capability that can be talked about divorced from human suffering. It's a humanitarian necessity, and every intercepted missile is a school that's still standing, a family still alive. Ukraine has shown extraordinary innovation and resilience, but no amount of ingenuity and bravery can compensate for shortages in critical systems. For the United States, the policy implication here is clear. We need to increase production of critical air defense systems and accelerate exports to Europe so that Ukraine can protect its people. Thank you.
That was terrific. So let's take 2 questions at a time for our panel. So we'll start on this side with a brown jacket.
Oops, sorry.
I voted to trustee here.
Oh, no, sorry. That must be dark brown.
Alrighty, so there's been a apparently reported walkback of Patriot building licenses for Europe this month. So my question is as follows. Oh,
Allegedly.
unconfirmed as always. In light of the reported US hesitation to grant production licenses, how did the delivery of timelines and operational benefits of the Patriot system compare to the STAMP-T systems that, SAP-T systems that the Europeans are working on? And how is it going to affect their buildup? All these deliveries to Ukraine, a common message is we're hollowing out NATO. and that is alarming a lot of the eastern flank of NATO. So how are the Europeans coping, and is ramping up SABT production throughout Europe a viable alternative? And what is the likelihood that licenses will actually make it to Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the man right here in the brown coat.
By the way, my understanding of that last question is the licenses restrictions were a few years ago to Ukraine. Europe is building Patriot systems in Europe, but they are not online. And when they come online, they will not be enough. You all can clarify that if I'm wrong. You all mentioned, quote unquote, to power Ukraine to do X or Y. I was going to ask whether that was referred to policy or military. I'm gathering from what you further said that it's to both, and it's the same. And I would just like to add that because this leads to more civilian deaths, not being able to shoot down these incoming that are targeted at civilian targets, these are war crimes. These are war crimes according to the Geneva Convention that was set up after World War II.
Just a question, please.
At what point does the West, I won't be specific, at what point does the West become complicit by not allowing Ukraine to defend its civilian areas? And on the capabilities for the multi-layered air ability to strike assembly areas. I thought that Ukraine's drones, because they can fly deep into targets in Russia, and in addition, it has the drones made, I think, by the same company that makes the Striker to do some rear. What is keeping it from hitting those assemblies? What makes that different from hitting the deep rear targets? Sorry to be so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Kateryna, and then Anna.
Yes, absolutely. So I will only touch on the last one since I think that's probably the one that applies to me the most. Look, the drones, they have a payload of like 15 kilograms, maybe up to 40. That's not enough. It's just simply not enough to actually cause significant damage. If you look at the strike patterns in the deep rear, so when Ukrainians strike targets in Russia, that's usually something related to gas, oil, and the reason because these targets can blow up. You know, if you use a little bit of payload, they can blow up. They can cause secondary, tertiary explosions. If you actually want to go after a force concentration, you need a lot more. You need a big payload to blow that up. So, and the biggest problem is, look, the Russians, the way that they hide from drones, it's not that we have a continuous line, you know, like a trench, World War I style trench where all the Russians sit all at once. The front line is very dispersed. It's like little pockets of 2-3 guys maybe at a time. And so you can't necessarily hunt all of them. They hide under fortified infrastructure, so like pipelines, bridges. It's really hard to find them and then also eliminate them at the right time. So if you want to generate operational effects, you have to go after the assembly lines that are located 50 kilometers away, where there's more than one guy. They're all in one place, and you can eliminate them that way. So I think it's a little bit different because, yes, these drones do accomplish a lot. But if you want to achieve additional operational effects that can have and change the battlefield, we need to empower Ukraine to actually have greater payloads. That's the biggest limitation.
Anna.
Do you have a follow-up question to that? Otherwise, I'm going to hop in on the other two questions really quick. Okay. So talking about the licenses and about production in general, I think that the question that we need to be asking ourselves is not only what are we capable of transferring to Ukraine, but what does the West also need? Because what's happening right now is that countries don't have the reserve to transfer everything that Ukraine needs for Ukraine to effectively establish air control and truly win this war decisively. Europe and the US are both underproducing. So if we're going to talk about, is Europe doing enough? Is the US allowing enough licenses to build Patriots? Do we even have the capacity right now to build enough Patriots is another question that I think we need to be considering. And I would say right now, we're seeing that Europe is starting to scale in its defense industry. The US is also starting to scale, but it's coming too little too late. Ukraine has had these needs for a long time, and we are reacting too slowly. So again, this is about pace. This is about, are we effectively supporting an ally country that's fighting for democracy to be able to win this war against an invading colonial power? On the question of war crimes, I mean, I think there's a lot of hesitancy to accelerate this war to anger Russia. I think we just need to accept that if we're going to stand up for what's right, someone's going to get mad, and it should be the Russians. So that's my take on that.
Thank you. Yes, the issue came up before with Yugoslavia, and the West did the right thing. So two questions on this side. Sarah, right here.
Stepanenko, you talked about the payloads and reaching out and getting behind the Russian lines. I read someplace, or it's rumored, that the Russians are developing a new glide bomb that will go 400 kilometers. And I'm assuming that's going to be put on like a FAB 500 or 1,000 kilogram type bomb. My question is, when these aircraft that carry these bombs go up in the air, are they not visible from the Ukrainian side? And if so, how can they be interdicted and shot down with some sort of long-range system that will take them out of the game? And conversely, why can't we reverse engineer the Russian 400-kilometer glide bombs and put them on Ukrainian aircraft to do the deep strikes into Russia?
Okay, and then the second question from the back.
Yaroslav Martinyuk. The question, what has been the impact of Elon Musk's decision to deny Starlink to Russians? Was there a change on the ground at this point?
Okay.
All wonderful questions. I actually just published a really big paper that looks at how the battlefield air interdiction campaign was impacted by Starlink's outages. But I'll first address the first question on glide bombs. Yes, there's rumors that the Russians are trying to figure out how to extend the ranges of their FOBs to 400. The way that they do it is they use the UMPC complexes. It's like an addition that goes on the glide bomb itself, and it essentially allows it to be more reactive. Ukraine does not have enough air defense systems. It doesn't. The reason why Russian forces were able to do a deliberate campaign against Diivka or later on against Odessa with extended ranges is because Ukraine just doesn't have the air defense systems to not just focus on the missiles, not just focus on heads, but also on targeting aircraft and shooting it down. There's some innovations that are happening in terms of the drones. We see this mostly on the Russian side right now. I don't look closely into the Ukrainian innovation cycle, but both sides are rushing to figure out how to put man pads on their long-range drones as well. So that might actually have an impact. For Ukrainian side, it's a matter of not just providing, missiles and air defense missiles. It's also about investment. It costs money to develop new things. It costs money to field new drones and new interceptors, and we just don't provide enough money. So I hope that answers your question. It's a multifaceted problem of prioritization for Ukrainians. I wish that Ukrainians would be able to resist the Russian glide bomb strikes across the entire battlefield, but right now it's just simply not possible. In terms of Starlink, in January of 2026, we saw an intensification of the Russian battlefield air interdiction campaign. They used very cheap Molnia drones that used to fly like 20 kilometers. They're plywood, very, very generic, but mass produced. And they put terminals on them. And instead of flying just 20 kilometers and blowing up a Ukrainian vehicle close to Konstantinivka, somewhere on, close to the front line, they now started to go after a major highway, the E50 highway that goes from Pavlograd to Pokrovsk and then connects to Dnipro city at ranges of around 100 kilometers. In the span of a couple of days, they blew up not only one bus full of miners, but also blew up a locomotive that was moving. They blew up a fuel tanker and several armored vehicles that were traveling towards the front line. So that was a significant problem. The Russians also did the same thing with railway infrastructure. We saw an intensification of these strikes on railways and moving trains. After February 1, the Russians have not been able to do that. The reason, especially the highway strikes on the E50, anything beyond like maybe 40, 50 kilometers that they were able to accomplish with repeater drones or mesh networks, we have not seen that. So that's good. That's how it should work. We saw that Russians have a vulnerability and we denied the Russians the use of Starlink. Great thing. I think it should be commendable. The problem is that Russians they're not standing and just saying, oh, well, I guess Starlink is done, so we're not going to do anything about it. They have other things that they can do. The big challenging threat is mesh networks. So they now fly Shaheds, the first-person view Shaheds. They now fly them using mesh networks. So it's where individual Shahed uses signal and disperses signals among themselves. And they can educate other drones about where air defenses are. If one drone gets shut down in a group, the other ones can still pursue a target. So mesh networks are becoming pretty popular. Other tools like fiber optics are still available to Russians. They still can hit cars and trucks and vehicles and using a fiber optic cable that is 50 kilometers and attaching it onto a cheap Molnia drone that costs them maybe $500 to make. So that threat had not vanished. The ranges for the time being are shorter. And the accuracy of the Russian precisions, especially against moving targets, had degraded. Ukrainian analysts predict that maybe give it 6 months and Russians might find a different solution. We see them establishing Wi-Fi bridges. So they might be trying to recreate that, but so we'll just have to see. But great questions.
We have 1 minute left.
Yeah, I just want to say on the Musk question really quick. Obviously, shutting down Starlink had a massive effect on Russia's ability along the front line. But again, why was the reaction so slow? Why did it take the time that it took to actually enact action and shut down Russian Starlinks that are being used to fight a war against Ukraine? So we in the West do have the power to impact what's happening on the front line by reacting to these tools that Russia is using more quickly with things that are produced in the West or controlled by the West. How are they still getting into Russia? How are there still Western produced components in Russian weapons? Why was Starlink on the front line? These are the questions we need to ask, and we need to be able to interrupt these with sanctions, with pressure, and that's something that we also need to be thinking about.
Thank you. So let's thank our panel for really terrific stuff. Kateryna, if people want to subscribe to your
On our website, go to understandingword.org, and we have a subscription. I published a really great paper on Starlinks, so please look into it. But yeah, thank you so much for your help and support.
Thank you.